Outside my window is a tree.
Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth with your host, the Green Bard. This is Lemongate 6, Lady Ashara Dayne, with haunting violet eyes. In this series, we've revealed that George R.R. Martin likely switched the real location of the house with the red door in Tyrosh to the fake location in Braavos, only to have Illyrio Mopatis unhouse Dany and Viserys in a political sabotage of Doran Martell's plot with Tyrosh. I've also theorized that the 4 loyal men who rescued Dany and Viserys from Dragonstone were a third conspiracy made up of Ned and the Kingsguard from the Tower of Joy. In our last couple episodes, we discussed a few more accessories to that conspiracy. Lord Willam Dustin, Maester Wallace Flowers, now Haldon Halfmaester, and Ashara Dayne, of course, now Septa Lemore. Having discussed the men of that trio extensively in our last 2 episodes, our focus now turns to Ashara Dayne. I'll introduce my theories about her story with an SSM, or So Spake Martin, from back in 1999. As to your speculations about Catelyn and Ashara Dayne, sigh. Needless to say, all will be revealed in good time. I will give you this much, however. Ashara Dayne was not nailed to the floor in Starfall, as some fans who write me seem to assume. They have horses in Dorne too, you know. And boats, though not many of their own. As a matter of fact, a tiny tidbit from A Storm of Swords. She was one of Princess Aelia's lady companions in King's Landing in the first few years after Aelia married Rhaegar. That's from 1999. I like how he says not many of their own. That of course means she probably has done some sea travel, just not on a Dornish vessel. George R.R. Martin is telling us that Ashara Dayne was active during the time of Robert's Rebellion. That's clear here. In this episode, I'd like to fill in the gaps in her movements in an attempt to explain how she got to where she is, introduced as Septa Lemore in A Dance with Dragons. Let's list the skeleton of my theory. She gave birth to her child by Brandon Stark at Starfall, probably around the time Jon was born at the Tower of Joy, making that child, who can only be Illyrio Dayne, cousin to Jon Snow and Ned's children. She faked her death at Starfall in order to disappear into hiding as part of Ned's and Arthur's conspiracy to protect the Targaryen children, Jon, Dany, and Viserys. As a wet nurse, she joined the 4 loyal men and Willam Derry when they rescued Dany and Viserys from Dragonstone, presumably remaining with Dany at the house with the red door as a nurse and caregiver. When Illyrio caused Dany and Viserys to be forcibly removed from the house with the red door, she was somehow convinced to join Aegon's cause instead as Septa Lemore on The Shy Maid. So, those are the bare bones of what I think happened. Let me first address her daughter. I admit that one argument against me is that it takes a lot for a mother to leave her child behind. I believe that Rhaegar's cause would be such a pull, but still, the only way I see that happening is if the child is left in the best of care. It's why I ultimately reject any theory that she is the mother of Daenerys Targaryen. There is no way she'd be tricked into leaving Dany to a life as a beggar in order to join Aegon's cause. She's also not the mother of Aegon because, as I said when covering Haldon, who Ned 100% sent to Essos, there's no way that Ned was involved in a conspiracy with Varys, as the Order of the Green Hand once argued. That never happened. To argue against this is simple. If Ned had been in such a plot with the Spider, all would consider it a successful venture, given that Griff's band is trolling along on the Shy Maid well into a Game of Thrones timeline. So why would Ned detest Varys? Yet he does detest Varys. No, Ned doesn't even respect him. So he did not participate in the Aegon plot. Ned conspired instead to protect Dany and Viserys and Jon. Those are the ones he worries over in A Game of Thrones. Back to Ashara. Why do I think she left? First, her man, who I think was Brandon, who she could never have been with long-term anyway, is dead or married if it's Ned. 2, her brother is also faking his death, and women are not really welcome in the Wall, so she can't really go with him. 3, if her child is Illyrio Dayne, she would be leaving her secure in the loving care of her brother, lord of one of the great houses of the realm. Note also that Edric Dayne was not yet born, so by being claimed as the daughter to the Lord of Starfall instead of as his sister's bastard, makes Illyria temporary heir, securing the future of House Dayne. But of course, Ashara's presence there mothering her would brand the girl a bastard instead, who can't inherit. So in summary, Ashara had a lot of reasons to give up her child and go into hiding, as her brother Arthur was also doing. In any case, Illyria Dayne being Ashara's daughter makes too much sense not to be the truth. I'll also mention YouTuber In Deep Geek's theory that Ashara is actually Gianna Reed, mother to Meera Reed and Jojen Reed, suggesting that Meera may be the child Ashara bore at Starfall. Believe it or not, my Tower of Joy conspiracy theory does not necessarily require that this theory be wrong. I keep an open mind that she could help rescue Dany and Viserys, then go back to Westeros once they're settled. And I, of course, acknowledge that Howland Reed was part of the conspiracy and certainly couldn't keep his eyes off her at Harrenhal, so while I buy the idea that he would have wanted her as a wife, I don't necessarily see how she would reciprocate. In the end, I don't think that theory is correct. What I am proposing is complicated enough, and besides, the eyes are wrong. If you're familiar with my King's Blood series, see episodes 2 and 3 of that series, you'll know that I believe George R.R. Martin, while prone to mistakes, does place a lot of stock in the eye color of his ancient houses. Ashara Dayne, one of those ancient houses, has laughing purple eyes, according to Meera, while Meera and Jojen both have green eyes. We actually have an example of a character who has one parent with a purple eyes and one with light eyes, the gray eyes of the Starks. That's Jon Snow, of course, with the purple eyes of Rhaegar Targaryen. His eyes are described as black, but they may just be a very dark shade of violet. If the Reed children were Ashara's, at least one of them would have some shade like that, a shade of dark gray, black, or indigo. But they do not. To me, that is a deal breaker. Then there's the tinfoil that Illyria is now taking on a new identity, Val. Val has the gray eyes of the Starks, which she could have gotten from her Stark father, either Ned or Brandon. In any case, I buy the idea that Illyria Dayne is Ashara's daughter. Maybe she's Val too, that would be cool. It would also explain why Stannis is using her as a way to proclaim legitimacy for his named Lord of Winterfell soon. And here's one more reason why I think Ashara faked her death. In short, rumor and innuendo mixed with propriety, and as a false trail of breadcrumbs for who would be the mother of Jon Snow. If people in universe think Ashara is the mother, they are less likely to connect the dots that it is actually Lyanna. You see, people were always going to whisper in dark corners about Ned and Ashara. We see that in Cersei's discussion with Ned.
"You've a bastard of your own. I've seen him. Who was the mother, I wonder? Some Dornish peasant you raped while her holdfast burned? A whore? Or was it the grieving sister, the Lady Ashara? She threw herself into the sea, I'm told. Why was that? For the brother you slew, or the child you stole?"
That's from a Game of Thrones, Eddard 12. And also, Catelyn brings this up as well.
"Catelyn heard her maids repeating tales they heard from the lips of her husband's soldiers. They whispered of Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, deadliest of the 7 knights of Aerys' Kingsguard, and of how their young lord had slain him in single combat. And they told how afterward Ned had carried Sir Arthur's sword back to the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfall on the shores of the summer sea. The Lady Ashara Dayne, tall and fair with haunting violet eyes. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally, in bed one night, Catelyn had asked her husband the truth of it. Asked him to his face. That was the only time in all her years that Ned had ever frightened her. "Never ask me about Jon," he said, cold as ice.
You see, our conspirators knew that this type of rumor was inevitable, so they used it to deflect from Jon's real parentage. And it worked. But they also knew that rumors like this would haunt Ashara's footsteps for the rest of her days, so she chose to exile herself and start anew. That's where the propriety comes in. In polite society, these types of whispers are dampened so as not to speak ill of the dead. Unless you're hateful like Cersei. Adding that her child was stillborn makes it even more hush-hush. This way, there is enough smoke to distract from Jon's real parentage, but the scandal doesn't cloud House Dayne for Ashara's whole life. So I think that is ample evidence and reason for her to go into hiding, which is all well and good, but I haven't really addressed the elephant in the room. Ashara is supposedly dead. Why do I think she didn't leap from the Pale Stone Sword Tower at Starfall? There are three main reasons. The first I've already covered extensively. I don't believe that her daughter was stillborn, nor stolen as Cersei accuses, and I don't think her brother Arthur died either. So the shroud of death, sadness, and gloom that supposedly clouded her final reunion with Ned is much reduced, leaving only the clouds of the deaths of Rhaegar's family and Lyanna, none of which are her direct kin. Second, and I tread lightly here, self-unaliving is very serious, and I don't want anyone to think that a certain type of person wouldn't do it in real life. That's not how this works, and I don't want to be insensitive to that. But that may be one way George R.R. Martin is suggesting in the text that it didn't happen to this fictional character, Ashara. As we've covered, there were rumors that Ned and Ashara had a fling at Harrenhal, although it was possibly branded that she was actually attracted to. I want to recommend Preston Jacobs' Ned and Ashara video to give more context in this. It's an excellent analysis of George R. R. Martin's connection to the story he's spinning with these two characters. More importantly, it highlights the archetype that Ashara embodies. She's from Dorne. She is a strong, independent, liberated woman, likely a feminist, not some damsel in distress like all the leading ladies in the early comic books and 80s movies. She's not Lois Lane, she's Xena Warrior Princess. I'm sure I could have come up with a better comparison here. Let me know if you have one in the comments. One might say she's the same archetype as Arya Stark, just a grown woman. And that is where we'll turn next in the text. Another reason I think she probably faked her death is that Arya, a character with a similar archetype, one who is also not nailed to the floor, thinks the story of her death is stupid. I think Ashara's blood burns as hot as Arya's in these passages.
Lady Ashara was my aunt. I never knew her, though. She threw herself into the sea from atop the Pale Stone Sword before I was born. Why would she do that? Said Arya, startled.
That's Arya in A Storm of Swords talking to Ned Dane. Later, while listening to Darian in the Cat of the Canals chapter, she makes it clear what she thinks of this story.
He is a man of the Night's Watch, she thought, as he sang about some stupid lady throwing herself off some stupid tower because her stupid prince was dead. The lady should go kill the ones who killed her prince.
She doesn't know that that's King Robert and her father. That's from A Feast for Crows, Cat of the Canals. The third reason I think she didn't die is simple. When a fan asked George R. R. Martin if her body was ever found, he clearly replied, no. That's all for now. Next time, we'll cover a little more about how committed Ashara was to Rhaegar's cause, what she did between Ned's two meetings with her at Harrenhal and Starfall, and why I think she really is Septa Lemore. In the meantime, I'd ask you, what do you think happened to Ashara Dayne? Am I convincing you that my ideas might come close to the mark? Peace. Thanks to all the terrific artists whose work is featured on this video. Thanks especially to all of my family who helped in this series so far.
Outside my window, here's a tree.
If you enjoyed this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.